Support for WUWM podcasts comes from Johnson Financial Group, helping customers build financial plans around their unique goals for over 55 years. More at johnsonfinancialgroup.com. Johnson Bank and Johnson Wealth, Inc. are Johnson Financial Group companies.
From 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR, this is Lake Effect. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. Today we'll tell you about the upcoming state Supreme Court election and what's at stake in this race.
Each seat on the court is important because it's a 10-year term. So even if the balance of the court doesn't shift from one ideological side to another this year, the person who's elected could serve potentially for another 10 years.
Then we'll explore the history of shuttered LGBTQ bar This Is It, now that it'll be designated as a historic landmark.
It's very rare to find a bar that has been operating since before Stonewall, but it's even more rare that the owner's legacy is carried forward decades after they're gone.
Plus, we'll learn about the practice of spiritualism at the Morris Pratt Institute in Whitewater. All that's coming up on Lake Effect. This is Lake Effect from 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. Thanks for joining us today. Wisconsin voters will be choosing a new justice for the Wisconsin State Supreme Court this year. The April 7th election comes after elections in 2023 and 2025 that altered the ideological makeup of the court, giving liberal-leaning justices the majority. The ideological makeup will not be influenced by this election, but that doesn't mean the race won't have a long-term impact on how big cases are decided in Wisconsin. WUWM's Mayan Silver is joined by Barry Burden, politics professor and director of the Elections Research Center at UW-Madison, to find out what's at stake in this election.
Well, each seat on the court is important because it's a 10-year term. So even if the balance of the court doesn't shift from one ideological side to another this year, the person who's elected could serve potentially for another 10 years, and the politics of the state might be very different later in that term, and the balance of the court might be very different. So it does contribute to the makeup of the court now, but also future compositions of the court when the other justices may be different people.
And both Taylor and Lazar are appellate court judges currently, yet the court's role is to decide significant or new legal questions rather than to take appeals on, more routine civil or criminal cases. What do we know about the candidates and their abilities to step up to this role?
Well, they both look like credible candidates. They, have judicial experience and law degrees and have worked in government for a while in different roles, one in the Attorney General's office, one in the state legislature. That makes them, I think, more comparable to one another than we have seen in some other years, where sometimes there's a candidate who has a lot of experience on the bench and another who has come from some other place. So that's sort of, I think, in the minds of voters, probably a neutralizing effect. There's not really a difference between them in that. On that side of things, and probably puts more attention on their personal orientations towards politics, the kinds of things they care about, the way they think about the law, rather than just experience.
Back in 2010, talking about the issues and the cases that will be coming before this court or are likely to come before the court, back in 2010, then Governor Scott Walker orchestrated a signature labor law called Act 10. It significantly curtailed the ability of public employees to form unions and collectively bargain. An appeal on that issue is expected to come before the Wisconsin Supreme Court. What's at stake here?
Well, this has been such a central issue to Wisconsin politics for 15 years now, the rights of public sector workers to organize and collectively bargain for wages and other benefits. It's been a battle, and I think it's really tainted party politics in the state legislature and transformed the way politics works in Wisconsin. It's amazing that this is still being dealt with in the courts, but there is a significant case that the Supreme Court is likely to resolve fairly soon that might restore some rights to workers and undo some important parts of that act. This may not be the last word, which is another reason for voters to care about this election. But I think it's a sign of just the central importance of our state Supreme Court in wading into some of the biggest, most contentious issues that the two other branches of government aren't able to resolve on their own.
And are you able to share anything you know about the candidates' views on Act 10?
Well, I think it's pretty clear they differ on their views about the role of public sector unions. Lazar worked in an administration close to Scott Walker, and I think would be supportive of that kind of legislation. Neither of the candidates will state their views openly on a matter that could come before the court, but that seems likely what her orientation would be. Chris Taylor has been backed by some labor unions in this race and would probably be supportive of, personally, of seeing some parts of the act be taken down. But I think both of them would pledge to be open-minded and to hear the evidence if a case like that came before them. So neither is going to prejudge the case, and we shouldn't, expect for certain how they will come down. The justices will surprise us at times.
Some of the big cases before the Wisconsin Supreme Court in recent years have involved election law. A narrowly divided court rejected President Donald Trump's lawsuit in 2020 to disqualify more than 200,000 ballots from Dane and Milwaukee counties. There's been litigation on absentee ballot drop boxes. Is there anything, do you expect anything to be waiting in the wings for the court on this topic?
Well, there are two cases waiting in the wings at the moment that deal with redistricting. There are two cases asking for the 8 congressional districts to be redrawn for different legal reasons under the state constitution. Those are likely to get back to the state Supreme Court and be decided sometime soon, probably not soon enough for this year's midterm elections to be affected. But that's just, I think, one example of things that may be coming their way. It would not be surprising to see lawsuits again around absentee ballots, around voter registration, around non-citizens voting and the voter registration rolls and requirements to become registered, given the salience of that issue nationally and Republicans concerned about it. So it seems unlikely that the court's going to be able to dodge election questions. Those just keep coming their way, and we should expect them to.
This is Lake Effect. You're tuned in to WUWM Radio. I'm Maayan Silver, speaking with Barry Burden, Director of the Elections Research Center and Politics Professor at UW-Madison. And on redistricting in particular, just to remind people, since 2010, state legislative maps drawn by Republicans built pretty large GOP majorities in our state legislature. In 2023, the Liberal-controlled Wisconsin Supreme Court overturned those maps and ordered that new district boundary maps could be drawn for the state legislature. You mentioned that congressional redistricting that question might not be resolved before the midterms, but what do you say are the chances of Democrats taking control of the state Senate or Assembly under these new maps in 2026?
Well, the maps are certainly more competitive since they've been redrawn. The Assembly maps were used in the last election in 2024, and Democrats picked up about 10 seats. So it's now about a 10-seat margin between the two, and within striking distance for Democrats to get a majority there. I wouldn't say it's likely that Democrats flip the Assembly because there are a lot of Republican incumbents who are likely to be reelected. But it's a possibility in a way that it has not been for the Democrats in a decade and a half. The state Senate is probably within closer grasp. Those new districts were used in 2024, but only for half of the seats that were up that year. Those seats are staggered, and now the other half are going to be up in 2026. And some of those Republican incumbents are facing voters they've never faced before because they're using new districts for the first time. There are at least 3 of those districts that Kamala Harris won in 2024 that are held by Republicans. So I think Democrats have a better shot at winning the Senate. But I think really any possibility could happen in a state like ours. It may be that one party pulls off victories in both chambers or they end up split. None of those would be surprising outcomes.
So that's, potential impacts of redistricting and what the state Supreme Court rules or does not rule on those topics. In 2025 also, and definitely in 2023 as well, abortion was a huge topic that was going to be coming before the state Supreme Court. In 2025, it ruled that an 1849 law doesn't ban abortion in the state. It's now available up to 20 weeks. Before that decision, experts deemed the 2023 and 2025 races for the court as some of the most important races on the issue of abortion in the country. What does it mean for the 2026 and future elections now that that issue has been decided?
Yeah, that was really a source of energy in those races because the Dobbs decision from the U.S. Supreme Court had just been handed down, and it really did change the experience on the ground in Wisconsin because abortion had been available at several clinics in the state and was immediately stopped the week that the Dobbs decision was handed down. So I think it had a bite or a concreteness in Wisconsin that the decision did not have in many other states. But now that has mostly worked its way through the system. The Supreme Court has weighed in. Abortion services have been restored at least a couple of those clinics. So the court has, I think the focus of the court and these Supreme Court elections has moved on to other things. As we mentioned already, Act 10 and public sector union rights, redistricting and election laws. I think there are some issues related to K through 12 education that are bubbling up around the state that may come back to the court. There are always issues of environmental regulation and the rights of businesses and water quality and other kinds of things. So it's always a full docket for the Supreme Court, and I think more important issues are now ending up there than in the past because the lawmaking branches of government, the governor and the state legislature, often can't cooperate to produce laws and get things done, and so parties end up litigating instead and bringing things to the court.
The court never took up the question of whether there's a constitutional right to an inherent right to an abortion via, equal protection and a right to privacy that would inherently provide a right to an abortion. That question was never taken up by the court. Do you anticipate that maybe that or other additional litigation on the issue of abortion could be taken up by the court in the future?
There could be other cases dealing with abortion or reproductive rights in various ways. And that's another reason for voters to pay attention to this race. Although conservatives are not going to take control of the court this year, it's just not mathematically possible. It is possible for the liberals to grow their majority from the current 4-3 mix to a 5-2 mix if Taylor were to beat Lazar. That might encourage litigants, groups that want to bring suits where they think where they favor a progressive answer to the question. It might encourage them to bring more cases to the court if they feel as though they've got a 5-seat majority there and even losing a justice would still let them prevail on some important cases. We might see more litigation pushing in a progressive direction with a larger progressive majority. So I think the kinds of things that precisely come up as complaints before the court depend in part on whether the liberals make a gain this year or we end up holding with the current 4-3 mix.
And are you able to elaborate a little bit on the K through 12? I know there's the 400-year veto that Evers did, which would increase school funding limits for the next 400 years. What else are you watching for when it comes to K through 12 education?
It seems as though there are both funding issues and some policy issues in the schools that could find their way back to the Supreme Court. There is the veto power of the governor and the funding formula for schools. There was just a case filed in Eau Claire trying to force the state legislature to provide more generous and more equitable funding to school districts around the state. That could end up being a Supreme Court case. There are a variety of lower-level disputes and cases around the state dealing with gender and trans rights in schools and what kinds of policies the schools can have in terms of students' use of pronouns and other kinds of treatments of issues in schools or in curricula. Those could end up being cases that come back to the Supreme Court. So I think there's a whole range of things related to K through 12 education that are not likely to go away. So many things that really matter to people, day-to-day lives, will end up before these justices.
Barry Burton, politics professor with UW-Madison, thank you so much for speaking to me about this.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Barry Burton is a politics professor and director of the Elections Research Center at UW-Madison. He spoke with WUWM's Maayan Silver. You can find more information about the upcoming elections at WUWM.com in our voter guide. And you can learn more about the state Supreme Court race in new bonus episodes of WUWM's podcast, Swing State of the Union. Those episodes will drop March 18th and 25th. Lake Effect is available as a podcast, so you can listen to us when you like. Find it where you get your podcasts, then remember to subscribe, download, and listen on demand. Later in the show, we'll learn about the Morris Pratt Institute in Whitewater, the practice of spiritualism, and the spooky legends it inspired. But first, we'll explore the history of Milwaukee's LGBTQ bar This Is It, which closed 1 year ago. That's coming up on Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM Milwaukee's NPR. You're listening to Lake Effect on Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. June Brem opened her bar This Is It, located just off of Cathedral Square in August of 1968. At the time, Milwaukee had almost 36 gay bars. But Brem wanted to create a space for her LGBTQ friends that was of better quality and with a sense of unapologetic inclusion. It became the longest-running gay bar in Wisconsin and was one of the 10 oldest in the entire nation. This Is It closed 1 year ago, and the LGBTQ community is still mourning the loss of this legacy space. But that legacy will be recognized with a state historic marker, only the second LGBTQ landmark recognized by the state. Michael Takash joins me to explore the history, legacy, and sense of community that This Is It fostered over the decades. He starts by explaining what motivated June Brem to open the bar.
June was, not part of the LGBT community. She was a mom. She was a married woman. She was someone who had worked in the service industry. And she lived in the suburbs and wanted to open a place of her own. And the service industry traditionally and historically has been a place where there are a lot of LGBT people. So she had a lot of LGBT friends. But she saw what they had to put up with. She saw the bars that had low lighting, that had no front doors, that only could be accessed through alleyways or side doors or unmarked entrances. And the thing that annoyed her the most was that none of the drinks ever had ice and were never cold. And, she really made a commitment to her gay friends that, she was going to find them a place that was better, that they could hang out, where they would be treated as well, if not better, than anywhere else in town. And over time, they're like, well, how's that going, June? Have you found our spot yet? And she's like, you know what? I'll find a spot. Trust me, even if I have to open it myself. And ultimately, that's what she did. She opened This Is It with a business partner. And there have been so much folklore around June's intentions. I've heard everything from she was a mafia mole who got this bar in a breakup. I was told that, she was, a lesbian and had a girlfriend. I was told that, This Is It was never a gay bar. It was never intended to be a gay bar. And I've often heard the legend that This Is It never had a sign and was actually a speakeasy, and that its origins even predated 1968 and went all the way back to Prohibition. And none of these stories that I just shared are true. The real story of This Is It is far more fascinating. Here you have an ally, a mother, a wife, a straight woman who wanted to help out her friends and create a place where they could go and be safe and be welcome and not have any trouble. And that's the legacy she launched. And she created this bar with a legacy of unapologetic inclusion, where everyone was welcome. It didn't matter if you were black, if you were a woman, if you were gay, if you were straight, if you were trans. Like, over the course of time, everyone walked through those doors and everyone was treated the same way. By her son, by future owners, and by future staff. And I just think that that's fascinating because, number one, it's very rare to find a bar that has been operating since before Stonewall. But it's even more rare that the owner's legacy is carried forward decades after they're gone.
Yeah, and on that note, one thing I want to talk about that is a tradition June started is the slideshow of photos. And I love this aspect, and the fact that it kept going up until its closure is pretty amazing. So can you tell us more about it and why it's unique at a gay bar especially?
Sure, absolutely. So, it wasn't really popular to take cameras to gay bars, and there were a number of reasons for this. So even if it was a party, if it was Christmas, if it was someone's birthday, if it was, a celebration, cameras still were kind of sketchy. I mean, someone who brought a camera to a bar had a secret intention. So cameras were always seen with skepticism and rarely allowed. Many of the employees and customers felt that they would be blackmailed. They felt that photos would be taken them of this in this space in a time before anti-discrimination protections. They feared that they would lose their jobs. They could be evicted from their apartments. And, of course, this was also a time when it was still technically illegal to serve alcohol or allow homosexuals to gather in a public place that was licensed by the city, county, or state. And people forget that. And June was anti-discrimination long before it was popular and long before it was legal. She didn't care that people didn't want to be photographed, and she didn't care that people might be blackmailed. She knew that these were her friends and that she knew that they deserved to be photographed, they deserved to be seen, they deserved to have a sense of community. So starting in the 70s, she started taking a lot of photos. Later there were Polaroids. Later there were 35 millimeter photos. But she started taking photos of events. And over time, she accumulated thousands and thousands of these printed photos, which eventually became a slideshow in the bar in the age of digital photos after June and her son Joe left the business. This slideshow just continued to grow and grow and grow. So a fun tradition of going to This Is It was having your photo taken, being added to the legacy and history of the bar, and being seen on the TV monitors months, weeks, years after the photos were taken. And it really created a bit of a living history for this space and a sense of connection that people really valued.
Now, being a bar that opened in the late 60s, obviously there were some changes, but what I loved about this place was that it didn't change for a long time. So it did kind of start off, or was known for being an older gay gentleman's space. So how did it go from there, and how did that kind of change over time?
Yeah, so the bar was opened, in 1968 for June and her friends, right? And I mean, these were men of a certain generation. This is the pre-Stonewall era. These were people who were, born in the late 40s and the 50s and so forth. And, this was a generation that was deeply impacted by the AIDS crisis. And a lot of those people who were there in the beginning of This Is It were lost the AIDS crisis. And, by all rights, that could have very well shut down the bar, as it shut down many bars around the country. Over time, new generations stepped in and people started coming. But I think the thing that's really interesting is that, even, when I was younger, we wouldn't go to This Is It. It was not a place for people in their 20s. It was not a place that was seen as fun. It was not a place that was seen as cool. It was a place that, older gentlemen went to, older white, gay, cisgender gentlemen, and it was their space. It was not our space. So they were very clear about this. So I think that it's fascinating to see that over time, that evolved dramatically. And, right around the time Mad Men was popular, This Is It had a massive comeback because people really appreciated the cocktail culture of the Mad Men era, the aesthetic of the Mad Men era, the look and feel of the late 1960s cocktail culture. And it really came into vogue. And I mean, there were nights, weeknights, Tuesday, Wednesday nights where that place would be at capacity. And that was not something people would have ever anticipated or expected. And I think that really was the beginning of This Is It turning a corner. That was in the last few years of June's life. She passed away in 2010. I think it shocked her that the bar was making this comeback because, a lot of those older gentlemen no longer went out. And, now there was this new generation coming in, and they were all very, very interested and committed to being part of this history.
With this history of this space and how it changed over time, what I think remained true in its many iterations, and kind of what you touched upon earlier, is that it always remained a true and honest community. And you spoke with people who have worked there or spent time there, knew June. A lot of iterations of this space has touched a lot of people. So as you were collecting people's reactions and memories, what does it mean to you for a building to become this legacy space?
Yeah, I think that was the most important part of the article for me, was hearing the perspectives from so many different angles, right? I mean, these were people from different generations, different backgrounds, different lived experiences, different communities. And, they each had something to reflect upon and to contribute to the article. And I think that it really collectively shows that, June's original intention of creating a space for her gay male cisgender friends evolved, expanded, and adapted to a space for everyone, a space where everyone who needed a space could find it, a space where people who needed, a community could build one. This was more than just a physical address. It was a spiritual experience that will last and stay with people. And maybe that experience is now over, but the memories remain and the impact remains, and, the spiritual value of having this place remains.
Michael Takash is a writer and author. We spoke about the history and sudden closure of Milwaukee's oldest gay bar, This Is It, last year. Just this month, state preservation officers approved a state historic marker for this landmark business, and it will soon be the second LGBTQ+ landmark officially recognized by the state of Wisconsin. Still to come, we'll learn about the practice of spiritualism and the Morris Pratt Institute in Whitewater. That's next on Lake Effect on WUWM. This is Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. The spiritualist movement of the 19th and 20th centuries claimed that adherents could communicate with the so-called spirit world. Even from its inception, the movement was controversial, with many claiming it was witchcraft. One of its most high-profile critics was Wisconsin native Harry Houdini, who toured the nation debunking spiritualist claims. But Wisconsin is also home to the first school of spiritualism. The Morris Pratt Institute was founded in Whitewater in 1889. It was the subject of an article in Milwaukee Magazine written by T. Krulos. He joins Lake Effect's Joy Powers to share more about it.
So we are talking about Whitewater spiritualism, which is something that still exists, but I think we really have to start with one person in particular, Morris Pratt.
Yeah.
Who is Morris Pratt?
Yeah, it's a very interesting story. The Pratt family moved from New York State to Wisconsin in the 1840s. Morris and his 6 brothers bought adjoining farmlands, and they became farmers and had some pretty good success at that. Morris got married, and in 1850, he and his wife were interested in spiritualism, which was very quickly becoming popular. And they found a community of spiritualists living in Lake Mills nearby. One of the people in this circle of spiritualists was a woman named Mary Folsom. She's also known by her later married names, Mary Hayes and Mary Shinowith, or some combination of. So I'll just refer to her as Mary Folsom. People claim that she had the ability to psychically heal people. So they would come to her with their ailments, and she would sort of go into a trance. She'd sometimes speak in tongues. It's said that she would absorb their illness, and she would have blisters and rashes on her body. She didn't charge people for this, but the spirits helped her out financially in other ways by giving her sort of spirit world insider trading tips. So Mary Folsom, at one point, is told by a spirit that there are riches to be had in northern Wisconsin. So she assembles a group of investors, including her 2 sons and Morris Pratt, who she's become friends with. And she says, specifically they need to mine in this area that would become the area known as Hurley, Wisconsin, and Ironwood across the border in the UP. And so they invest this money, and sure enough, they strike it rich with these iron mines. And Morris Pratt had said that if they did make money on this, he would invest some of his money back into promoting spiritualism. So eventually he gets paid out by an outside interest, wants to buy his stake in the company. And they gave him, I think it was like $500,000. Anyway, it would be the equivalent of about $6.1 or $2 million today. So he makes quite a bit of money, and he keeps to his word and builds this building in downtown Whitewater. He first called the Temple of Science, but after a few years, it was renamed the Morris Pratt Institute and became a college for spiritualists. So they had your normal sort of college courses on like geography and math, but they also had classes where they learned how to conduct the seance and communicate with the dead.
Interesting. That was one of my big questions. Yeah, what do you do at a school for spiritualism?
They had a big room where everything in it was white, painted white. The furniture was white, and they would conduct seances in the special room. They had a big lecture hall where people would talk about spiritualist theory and stuff like that.
Now, of course, spiritualism was always controversial, but at the time it wasn't just revolutionary because of their beliefs, but also because there were women in leadership, which seems to have added to the kind of derision faced by locals.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the reasons why these urban legends, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about, started to develop, because it was very rare for women to have a leadership position in any sort of church. And spiritualists believe that they can communicate with the dead. So very quickly, whispers started to go around town about what was going on inside of this building. They're like, there's these women that are leading this group of people. They're speaking to the dead. It must be witchcraft, right? So the locals nicknamed the building the Spook Temple. And yeah, they said it was like a school for witches.
As you say, around this time, the legends of the witches start. One of the things you look at in the article is the so-called witches triangle.
Yes.
A space that's it's created by, if I have this right, Whitewater's 3 cemeteries. They form a point.
Yes.
So is the witches triangle in the middle of the points?
Yes. As happens when you have 3 points, they form some sort of triangle. This one's a nice isosceles triangle, and it's said that all of the area within this triangle is under a witch's curse.
How much of the town is in that area?
A lot. So
a lot of cursed land.
Yes, yeah.
Now, there are still elements of the Morris Pratt Institute in Whitewater. I should say the actual institute is still around. It's moved. We'll get to that in a moment. But what are some of the bits of this spooky legacy that are left in Whitewater?
Well, the institute operated up until the 1930s, and then interest in spiritualism was starting to wane. The Great Depression had happened. So they ended up closing their doors by the end of the 30s. After that, it became a women's dormitory for the college. And I think that's where a lot of the urban legends started. Because can you imagine? You're in this building that used to be a witch school. Of course, you're going to share stories, and those stories are going to change. That building is gone. It got torn down in the 1960s. But the legends still persisted. They didn't disappear. But a lot of them kind of moved. There's a water tower in Starren Park that's called the Witches Tower. That tower was built the same year that the Institute was, but it doesn't have any relation to it directly. But it looks kind of old and creepy, so people have stories about a demon being locked up in the tower and witches performing a black mass in front of it. There's the 3 cemeteries of the Witches Triangle. One of them is supposed to have a spirit of a witch named Mary Worth, who has cursed the town. And I love this. She's not only a witch, but in some telling, she's also an axe murderer. So, and then there's a spell book that is at Anderson Library, or that's the rumor. The book does actually exist, but it's an old hymn book. It just looks very intimidating because it's huge and it's leather bound and the leather is starting to rot away. So those are just a few, by the way. There's other stories about ghosts and witches. So
Underground tunnels.
yes, underground tunnels that get to the witch's tower. So there's no shortage of stories in this pretty small town.
Yeah. Now, the Morris Pratt Institute does close in Whitewater, but it didn't close up shop. It actually moved to Wauwatosa.
Yes, yeah, it's still in operation today, which is really amazing. And as far as I know, it's the only school that has a tie to spiritualism.
Are they still a spiritualist school? Do they still teach the same kinds of things?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a house that was remodeled, and you can still kind of get the feel that it used to be a house. So the lower level, they have a couple of libraries with artifacts relating to spiritualism going back to the 1800s. Upstairs, there's a small classroom. There's also a bedroom for visiting teachers. They now operate as an online school, but they maintain that physical space where, they do the administrative work. They sometimes will have like a special lecture or an open house. And then, the library is used for research as well.
Very interesting. So if you're looking to lead your own seance.
Yes, you can go to their website and you can sign up for their courses.
Very nice. Well, T, thank you so much for joining us here on Lake Effect and sharing your work.
Thank you. I hope everyone has a happy October season.
T. Krulos is a local writer, and he spoke with Lake Effect's Joy Powers about spiritualism and the Morris Pratt Institute last year. Before Fred Rogers and Jim Henson, Sheri Lewis was a true pioneer of children's television. She was a dancer, singer, magician, and showrunner. But Sheri is best known as the ventriloquist behind her trusty sock puppets Charlie Horse, Hush Puppy, and of course, Lamb Chop.
I'll introduce you properly. Ladies and gentlemen, I love this. Presenting my favorite supporting act, Miss... What are you shaking?
I am not your supporting act.
Oh, she kills me. And what is so funny?
What is so funny is that I don't support you. You support me. These people did not come here to see you. They came to see me, right? Right? Tell her.
Through many shows, songs, and specials, Sheri Lewis and Lamb Chop had a decades-long relationship. A new documentary called Sheri and Lamb Chop dives into the life of Lewis and her career that cemented Lamb Chop as an enduring pop culture icon. The documentary's director is Lisa D'Appolito. She joins me to share more about the film. So a simple sock puppet with long eyelashes had such a hold on us for so long, and honestly, Lamb Chop still does. So before this film was even an idea for you, what was your first memory of Lamb Chop, or was Sheri Lewis herself the person that you were drawn to?
I was in the in-between age group, so I wasn't watching Sheri at the beginning of her career and her early shows, and I wasn't watching Lamb Chop's play along. So I only really knew Sheri and Lamb Chop from like Hollywood Squares and like being on shows. But I remember hearing about the project from a friend of mine, and I was like, Lamb Chop. I had a Lamb Chop lunchbox. I don't know why I did, but I know I had a Lamb Chop lunchbox. So that kind of excited me about the project. And then I started learning about Sheri, and it was really, I think I'm always looking for stories of really powerful women who are unsung heroes. And I love comedians. And I always felt that she really is a comedian. She's a 2-woman, 3-woman show, but it's just her. And so I was really looking for a character to do a film about somebody who really touched somebody's heart. And I think Sheri and the puppets have that. And I think Sherry is an unsung hero. And I think that people underestimated her. And when they learn who she is, it's a really great story and she's really empowering.
How did her parents influence her career path? Because to me, it seems like she was raised to be a performer.
Well, I don't think there ever can be another Sherry Lewis again. If you hear about her background. Her father was a professor of math, but he was also the official magician of New York City, which I had no idea that that really was true. And then when I looked up Abe Horowitz in his New York Times obituary, it says Peter Pan, the Magic Man, official magician of New York City. So Sherry's father, he helped kids out who were in trouble, and he would teach them math through magic. And he started these magic clubs, and a lot of the famous magicians you know today are kind of descendants of that line. And then Sherry's mother was the music supervisor for the Bronx schools. So Sherry grew up with both music being a big part of her life and magic being a part of her life, and parents who were extremely supportive in her being both, a musician and a magician. It was right after vaudeville. So she had all jugglers and belly dancers and ventriloquists and puppeteers and all these people in her home. So it was a very magical time, I think.
So, of course, Sherry was multi-talented. She showed off all these talents in her various shows over the decades, but we, of course, know her best as a ventriloquist with Lamb Chop. And as a kid watching this, I didn't fully recognize that, right? Like, didn't know ventriloquism was a term, but watching it as an adult and knowing the skill that it takes to do that. For Sherry, what did ventriloquism allow her to really hone into or to help her express herself in the world?
Well, I mean, she was a woman she started her career in the 50s and 60s, where women really didn't have a voice. And so I think Sherry used her puppets to be able to say things that she couldn't say, such as she used it both in her political ways, like why can't a woman be president, and also in her personal life. Like there's a clip later on where she's having troubles in her marriage, and she goes on a talk show and she talks about divorce with the pup. She has Hush Puppy talk about divorce, which she knew her husband was sitting in the audience watching that. So Sherry used her puppets to say things that maybe she couldn't say, but who would get mad at a puppet?
Right. Well, we have a clip of Sherry and Lamb Chop discussing the possibility of a female president. Let's listen now.
25 presidents, all men. Not one could do the job right. If they had gotten just one girl, she would have been enough.
So Sherry started working, I suppose, like professional, we can call it, around age 24. And her career, she, as you mentioned, was a producer, a writer. She was very much her own showrunner in her shows in the late 50s and early 60s. And while she was so young looking at some of these clips, she was also a massive pioneer of television. You know, a lot of people think of Mr. Rogers as a main person that's an example for children's television, but she, in fact, was the main predecessor to that. So can you explain her impact on children's television specifically, especially when it comes to hosting styles?
I think her first show, Facts and Fun, I think she was around 17 years old. We were able to find that clip, not the clip, we found like a VHS or not a master of that show. So Sherry was around 17 at that time, and she was the host of Facts and Fun. So she had a very intimate style with kids. I mean, she was so cute too, and so like personable. I think people related to her right away. If you listen to her songs, even from the beginning, they're all about believing in yourself. They're all about being the best you can be, even from the beginning. And I think she also simplified things for her audience, like games and things you can make. So it was a very personal, very intimate show. And I think Sherry never talked down to children. She talked to children. So I think that was a very important style that she had.
Oh, and especially looking through the lens directly to kids at home, right?
Yeah. You know, back in the day, there was only 3 television stations, and Sherry had the prime Saturday morning spots. So she had an audience of, I don't know, 10, 15 million children watching her.
So with that first show around 17 years old, working for decades through her 60s, you know, we were talking a bit before we recorded about how multi-generational Sherry is, and Sherry and Lamb Chop. Lamb Chop falls into that category too. So, what were some of the challenges for you of trying to give audiences a good picture of Sherry throughout her life? Because there's so much to go through. I can't imagine all the hours of tape you must have seen.
Well, it's always hard to really get to know who somebody is. And Sherry was very particular about her interviews and how she presented herself. So it was a little bit difficult to find out who the real Sherry was underneath this story. And then we came across this interview that we use a lot in the film about where this one interviewer, I'm sorry, I don't know his name right off the bat, he connected with Sherry and he's like, who is the real Sherry Lewis? And somehow that interview, I think, gave me a lot of information that I didn't have before. So that was really, really important. Also, I have an amazing editor, Andrea Lewis. When she started going, we have all these, like Sherry's library of shows is hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of shows. And Andrea started realizing that Sherry's using her puppets to tell her story. So when she started pulling out some examples, like there's another example where Sherry's husband is going through this kind of experimental period. And my editor found a clip where Lamb Chop and another puppet are talking, and it seems as if the puppet is high and Lamb Chop is telling the puppet to come down. And my editor was explaining this to me, and I was like, wait, I don't understand what you're talking about. And then she showed me, and I was like, wow, that is Sherry expressing herself through the puppet. So, like, having an amazing editor in a project like this, which is tons and tons of archival, they can see things that I can't see.
Are there any clips or other primary documents that stand out to you that didn't make it into the film?
Yeah, there were a lot of other puppets. Sherry over the years tried to have a lot of different puppets, but everybody wanted Lamb Chop. So she had this big baby that was very strange. She had a geriatric kangaroo that never made it in there, and I'm still like, wish I could have got the kangaroo in there somewhere. So I think those were the vast amount of puppets I think I would have liked to have shown. But she just did so much.
So, with Sherry doing so much and having so many puppets, outlets, and ways to express herself, I was kind of grappling with that same question you have. Who is Sherry Lewis? Because she said in your film, it was clear that I found myself in myself, but it seemed like even with her family, she was very guarded with truly expressing herself without the medium of puppetry or entertainment. Did that make it difficult for you to try and have that central idea or message in the film? Because in a good way, people are full of contradictions, right? But when you have this major figure like Sherry Lewis, I still found myself like wondering more about her.
Well, it's interesting because, like, this is something Andrea and I would talk about a lot. There's an interview where Sherry's like, I don't seek.
That's the other thing that stood out to me. There are people who seek and people who do. I don't seek. I think there's just the unfolding. That stood out to me. Yeah.
And I think that's her philosophy in life. And I think that that's how she was able to achieve so much because she didn't really, stay in the dark times. She just kind of kept going. It's a good lesson for people, or at least for me. Yes, it's very easy to get stuck in something, but I don't think Sherry got stuck. So I think that it's not that Sherry wasn't emotional or deep. I think she just had a different philosophy.
Yeah, I came across Sherry and Lamb Chop primarily through her last PBS show. And it was fascinating to know kind of both Sherry and Lamb Chop's different lives of decades before I even came across them and interacted with them in that way. But I feel like a through line with this, even in the periods where Sherry was trying to do new things or reinvent herself, the center of that and what she believed in most to teach to kids, in addition to just the value of educational television, was self-esteem. That was the most important lesson to get. So despite all the contradictions we talk about, do you think that's like what stands out about Sherry Lewis the most is her personal value and self-worth?
I think so. I think she always believed in herself. And she believed that if children believed in themselves, they can do whatever they wanted to, as long as they tried. Like Mallory tells me the difference between Mr. Rogers and Sherry. Like Mr. Rogers is, we love you just the way you are. And Sherry is, we love you, but be the best you can be, like be the best version of you. So I think there's a sort of push in Sherry, like it just doesn't happen by just being you. You have to go for your goals and you have to achieve them. And then, and celebrate them too. Like that's what she said with self-esteem is you teach a child to do something, and when they do it, you celebrate it. So I think that's the most important thing that Sherry gives. Like when Mallory does shows with Lamb Chops, sometimes I'll go to the shows and people will always come up to her and say, I had an awful childhood, but your mom was there. So there's something that Sherry was able to empower children just by doing whatever she was doing.
Well, Sherry's certainly a great example to look up to across all generations. So, Lisa, I want to thank you so much for making this film and for joining me today to talk about Sherry and Lamb Chop.
Thank you so much. It's really great, and it's great that you watched the film with your parents. It really makes me happy to hear that.
I'm glad.
And when things go wrong, you gotta change your song. You've gotta
Lisa D'Appolito is the director and producer of the documentary Sherry and Lamb Chop. You can stream it on Apple TV or Amazon Prime Video. And that wraps up today's show. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. If you've missed any of Lake Effect this week, you can find all of our conversations at WUWM.com. If you'd like to take the show on the go, you can download the Lake Effect podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Tomorrow on Lake Effect, we'll explore Wisconsin's sauna culture. Join us tomorrow for that, but for today, thank you so much for joining us right here on listener-supported 89.7 WUWM Milwaukee's NPR.